academic struggle as well as real life struggle in terms of changing the justice system in this country. But anyway, I think the next presenter is going to be Rodney Coates, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just stop there and let Rodney make his presentation.
About 7 minutes max.
Hmm? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
We often say in one tradition, "Ampeto washtelo," and it means this is a good day, and many other things. So my understanding is we'll go in the order of whatever the presentation is, but Melanie asked me to say something special in regards to his life force, and then also in a couple of the meetings we've had, I've said a few things. So I'll use a couple of traditions in Lakota. We usually use two major phrases. We often pray to and refer to something called Wakantanka, and that it means a mysterious life force, but it's not necessarily the creator, the Great Spirit, which is kind of more like an English version of it. And this life force is imbued in all things. And the other word that we tend to use in ceremony is tunkashila. And tunkashila can be glossed to mean grandfathers, but when it's used in ceremony or in song, it means the ancestors, those that went before. And so we also have a word called itanshan. In the Lakota and Dakota tradition, we did not have chiefs. We had itanshan, and they were people that rose to positions of leadership acknowledged by consuls, especially consuls of elders. And so we have some elders here that certainly can give that kind of recognition. And when there's a passing of that, there's two different variations, and we have some major struggles going on about that right now and have for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years. When a person passes, there is imbued in their corporal existence. That's why in our Northern Plains tradition we return the body to the earth. There's what we call the nahi. But there's also the spiritual tradition or life force. It's called the wanahi. And so when you've heard stuff like the ghost dance, the very famous ghost dance, I've published a lot of work on that, that's actually the wanahi, and it's a calling on the ancestors and the movement of the life force through the wanahi. And then we use this word called wopila or wopida. Can be done either way, and it means giving honor to. And so sometimes we say we give an honor to that life force. And then when, especially in Itanshan has passed, and then I have a little presentation here, so I'll just use the words. I've using these other words, Kichita Sapa Oyate, and that would be a warrior for the black nation, or and so that's the words I was giving him in this presentation. So he's an Ita and a Kichita Sapa Oyate, and so it's done in a very precise way. And there's two things. I will end with just a short little song, but for 1 year, someone is charged with recognizing a life spirit of such a person, and it's called Keeping of the Spirits. And it appears to me, of course, very appropriately. That's what Melanie has done, and that's like a remembrance, but it's also a way of keeping that among the people. And then after 1 year, especially for Nitanshan, it's within the society, and then people tend to remember that as part of this. And at that time, it was also a letting go of the grief. You may have heard of the wound, after Wounded Knee, the 100th observation, 7th generation. Then we had a wiping away of the tears. So after 1 year, there's a release, and it's called Releasing the Spirit Ceremony. And this is so powerful that the United States banned this ceremony. Really, they banned it. They made it illegal, and they would go after it. And they were trying to force people to do certain things. And in that sense, I will sing just very briefly for this Itansha of the Kichita Sapa Oyate. I will sing to one direction. And that would be to the west, because we have associated 4 colors: red, yellow. Yellow always goes to the east, because that's the rising sun. Red is the northern peoples. South is nothing to do with race, by the way. It really doesn't. It's just amazing. But and then usually black or sometimes dark blue if we don't But in this case, there is a passing on that's associated with it. So I'll try that, because she asked in the right way. I was actually charged with this in ceremony, if somebody asked that. We use these words sometimes if we separate something out of ceremonial song. Wayonkie, wayonkie, wayonkie. And that means there's something happening here. We must pay attention. There's something happening. And then I'll just sing to the western direction. We oyam patakia etualo ni chekiayo chekiayo etua wayonki elo elo. And that's to the Tunkashila of the West. So I do that to honor Wopila, Rod Bush.
Rodney Coates of Miami University, right? Okay. And Rodney, another major contribution of Rodney's, he's the listserv manager for ABS Discourse, and I understand you just won an award.
A little one.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay.
Founders Award.
Yeah.
A big one.
Old man. And first of all, please excuse me, I'm going to do something. Those who know me, I rarely do. I'm actually going to read much of my presentation, so excuse me for that. When one typically is asked to review the life's work of another, some might think in terms of a definite start and finish. Born in 1945, died in 2013. It may include some mention of his major works, the end of white world supremacy, black internationalism, and the problem of the color line, and we're not what we seem, black nationalism and class struggle in American century. Dozens of articles, book chapters, public appearances, talks, hundreds of students that he mentored, and literally thousands of lives that he touched with his scholarly insights, probing questions, and thoughtful analysis. As I consider the work of Rod Bush, I'm inclined to think of it in terms of a relay race, where Rod passed on the baton. And then again, I most remember of all Rod's smile. A smile that suggested through it all a hope in the future, a faith in the possibilities of the struggle, and a confidence that the dreams of a socially just world were not only worth the effort, but were obtainable. But for Rod Bush, it was still more about the journey than the destination. And for Rod, that journey was filled with enthusiasm and possibilities, with wonder and promise, with joy and determination, with excellence and enthusiasm. So as we who are yet remain in the race contemplate our next steps, perhaps considering Rod's quest for social justice might be not only instructive but encouraging. And as we do so, let us not forget his smile. Rod's journey for justice is best understood as a quest for both understanding and remedies. Frequently critical of the navel-gazing sociologists that frequently gather to sip wine and bemoan the darkness, he chose to interrogate that darkness and reveal the praxis of change. This praxis for change involves what Bush articulated as black nationalist consciousness, and I quote, that appears to most whites as a great ideological transformation, and a quite unfathomable transformation at that, but it should not be a mystery. Black nationalism has been a significant component, he argues, of black consciousness for over 200 years, varying in intensity over time, place, and circumstance, unquote. Perhaps it has been such a mystery, particularly among sociologists, because we have a penchant for oversimplification, historical conservatism, and ideological reductionism, while treating race, class, gender, and sexuality individually and asserting a value-neutral position. We invariably find ourselves not unlike the hamster on the treadmill, or Sisyphus pushing the intellectual boulders up the hill, writing, publishing, and pimping the problems, just to watch it fall down again. No wonder so many in our trade, especially ideologues, you name your flavor, Marxists, Weberians, structuralists, conflict resolutionists, so forth, becomes disenchanted, jaded, or is it gelded? Perhaps they forgot the basic reasons many of us were attracted to the field of sociology, the quest for social justice. But reading the work of Rod Bush is refreshing in this regard, for he neither lost his passion nor his focus. He stayed the course and ran the race. How did Bush stay the course? Perhaps through what he called the long march. All too often we tend to have historical myopia or amnesia when we think of blacks and the struggles for justice. Hence, there are those who wonder at the sudden explosion that marked the 1960s and fail to link this to the continuous revolutionary struggles that started when the first slave rebellions on the first slave ships that crossed the Atlantic over 400 years ago. The problem, as explained by Bush, is that we often cut and dice the various explosions: Nat Turner's Rebellion, Che's Rebellion, Haitian Revolution, African Seminole Wars, genocide and displacement of Native Americans, Los Amistad, Civil War, African, Middle Eastern and Indian colonialism, post-colonial struggles, the Chinese exclusion, Japanese internment, which all led up to the 1960s civil rights movement. Episodic examinations fail to demonstrate the links, the trends, and the processes of both revolutionary struggle and change. Hence, the frustration as one misidentifies the end of the movement, misunderstands what appears as the retrenchment and rearticulation of the system, and misinterprets the lull in the quest for justice. The Long March helps by showing the continuity between events, the structures that support change, and the processes which invest the struggles with energy, purpose, and direction, especially during moments of rest. Consider, if you will, bodybuilding as an example, where one works their muscles through exercise, weight training, and diet. We often think only of the active portion of this process, but what happens during those states of rest? The rest pause, by the way, is used by professional bodybuilders as a means of maximizing their individual workouts. This technique not only helps fatigue the muscles, but can also help break through challenging strength and growth plateaus. Similarly, your muscles and the energy systems that fuel them need time to recover. In other words, even though individual body parts are getting rest days, the overall nervous system, which fuels training for all those body parts, must itself have rest days free from the demands of weight training. If the nervous system doesn't get the rest, it will soon burn out, and training will severely be impacted. Therefore, the Long March helps us understand that those episodes of rest in social movements are necessary to allow the community to recover, to regroup, and to consolidate the various victories of the specific revolutionary moment. As Bush implies, we often confuse revolutionary minutes with revolutionary movements. Such confusion leads to the conditions of revolutionary fatigue, stasis, and ultimately personal withdrawal or retreat. Taking Bush's Long March allows us to understand that, and I quote, "The black radical politics are part of the fabric of U.S. life and remain so for the foreseeable future." Why? Because the African slave trade and the displacement of Native Americans was fundamental in the establishment of the capitalist system and the geoculture and common sense in which people understand their relationships to one another. This means that the development and elaboration of a set of stratification processes based not only on race, but also gender and others. But anyway, with blacks on the bottom, Native Americans and indigenous people next. This stratification order was elaborated into a system of world-wide supremacy, which replaced the religious-based competition of the pre-capitalist world, unquote. What this suggests is that black nationalism is part, or should be viewed as part of a much wider set of processes, interconnected and intertwined. This greater set of processes positions national struggles within a global context, and rightly so. For it was global capitalism and imperialism which created a world system of exploitation based on race and gender stratification. It was this observation that allowed Bush to see past the false dichotomy many confused between race and class, or race and gender, identity politics, so necessary for the organizational impetus associated with various civil, social, and human rights struggles, is both a benefit and a liability. Identity politics can be either a bridge or a barrier to such struggles. Thus, Bush concludes that the politics and programs of, say, a Louis Farrakhan was both conservative and a hindrance to not only black nationalism, but also justice struggles. He also rejected the Marxist claims of a generic proletarian unbifurcated by race and nationality. Bush viewed the cooperation and marginalization of black labor that fostered by Cold War liberalism and the repression of the left in the immediate post-World War II period as being a two-pronged attack against black labor and its struggles. He argued that it grew out of the recognition and fear that African American social insurgency was indeed, and I quote, the central force for a just and egalitarian social order within the U.S. borders, unquote. And perhaps this is where the baton has been passed, for Bush highlights the necessity of reimagining black workers and their organizational struggles, and understanding how African American workers have experienced class identities historically in ways that may diverge from ideological models. Such a view would recast Malcolm X, for example, seeing how he brought a message from both self-love and hope from the streets of Harlem to a national stage. It embraced black identity, Africa writ large, while also reaching out to a broader national and international agenda. This post-MAQ Malcolm recognized the politics of both struggle and cross-racial, class, gender, and national coalitions. This worldview, using Bush's term, recognized the long march toward both liberty and justice. It recognized that it accomplished one step, one election, one revolutionary moment at a time. And recognizing this, Rod could smile. Thanks, my brother, for your vision, the journey, and your smile.
Am I going? My turn? Sorry. Hi, my name is Dan Douglas. I was one of Rod's students, I guess beginning in 2003, and up until 2013 as far as I'm concerned. Whenever I talk about anything, I just try and connect it in some way to what I've heard already, if I'm not the first one to say something. So connected with what David's an urbanist from Detroit. I was just in Dearborn for 6 weeks, and so everything he was saying about Detroit kind of just resonated with me a lot. Thinking about what Hector emphasized about Rod about his teaching, I mean, that's actually what I want to talk about. I really want to talk about what Rod did as an instructor, and since Rod was Rod fostered a kind of an interest in sociology for me. I don't think I would have been, actually I can say I'm certain I wouldn't have been a sociologist had it not been for Rod. I didn't go into school knowing what sociology was, and knowing now more about. I was at the meeting down the street, the other one, and if you spend some time there, you can certainly become a little disinterested in sociology. I can tell you that much. Anyway, actually, I should have brought my other thing up here with me. I've talked about this a couple of times. I was at the Left Forum talking about Rod, and I was at the Community Memorial talking about Rod. And what I want to just say a few words about is that my primary encounter with Rod was in a university setting, interacting with faculty member. And the thing about that is that the university is not really a space typically where, I don't know, radical transformation happens. It can be antithetical to that. And since leaving Rod's formal mentorship and going on to finish my PhD, or finishing now, I can see how the opposite of all that happens. Like, you can actually, like, if you're not being systematically encouraged by someone like Rod, by strong mentors, it can be really hard to maintain, I don't know, your development as a radical, as an interested scholar, as an activist. But I study education, and I teach the sociology of education. But something that struck me when I was asked to say something about Rod was, Rod does radical education in the university, and how can we understand that? And so I just want to go through a few things. And it pivots between thinking about people who thought about education, theorists of education, and going back to things that I experienced in Rod's classroom and in my relationship with him. So sociologists talking about education, just to start with Durkheim. And so Durkheim says that the essence of the educator is the moral authority, that for him, the most important aspect of education is moral education. If you don't have a moral development for society can't continue. And Rod was a moral authority in the classroom, and I'll give something that I'll read, right? There was something about Rod's way of teaching, beyond just what was being taught, which made him that moral authority. Anyone here who's taught knows the classroom can be a tough place to manage, and anyone here who's taught sociology from a critical standpoint knows that it can generate tense discussion. And in my years taking every course that ever had Rod's name next to it, you knew that there were people who had enrolled in the classes just to disagree with what he was saying, just to be kind of that, just to kind of try and be a foil. And as a young teacher myself, I know how difficult that can be, and you can crack under the pressure. The remarkable thing was Rod didn't crack under the pressure. It was like, while I was at St. John's, I witnessed other professors who were older than Rod crack under that pressure and just like lose it at a student, right? Or a group of students. But Rod didn't crack. He was a veteran of social movements and knew the importance of maintaining a high ground in the classroom, right? And so he did so with a style. He would invite the discussion, kind of get you in there, kind of get the antagonist into the discussion, and almost seems to relish the controversy, and calmly, using his wealth of knowledge, which often would hit me like a ton of cinder blocks like a week after he said something. Oh my God, what the and would simply humble his adversary without harming his adversary. And I think about it in an education setting, in a classroom setting, if you win but lose your cool in the process, it's a Pyrrhic victory. We all know what a Pyrrhic victory is. You lose the war for the sake of winning the battle. Despite whatever controversies, and they were frequent, the community would be maintained in the classroom, and that would allow much more learning and development to take place. So that's the moral authority of what Rod did in the classroom. There's also this important concept that John Dewey has, is that what makes education different from training is the idea of a shared interest, right? That beyond just teaching someone how to do something, you have to get them to be interested in that thing being successful. So you could teach someone how to play music, but if they don't value music, if they don't want to play music, they're not going to do it. They'll learn it for just as long as they're tested on it, and then they'll stop. And today's educational apparatus emphasizes testing to such a great degree. We can see that every day. But how do you create a shared interest when you've only got, at most 3 hours a week with your students? Well, Rod sent a lot of email. Was anyone on Rod's email lists? It often got frightening. I didn't know why he was up till 4 a.m. sending emails to me. But again, like I said, lots of things about Rod and what he did hit me hours, weeks, or months, or years later. Maybe this one just hit me when I was in Dearborn. What he was trying to do was show you something about the world. He was trying to take everything that you were learning in class and show you it's still going on, it's still happening. There's really something still happening. The world is still happening. And what you're learning in my class matters beyond, can have an impact in the present. Most students think of school as a place you go to learn about things that that did happen or were conceived at some time. And the scary thing is that most students, when they think that, are right because of the education they're receiving, the nature of the schooling they're receiving. Schooling rarely touches the present. But Rod, who I now think of as the digital St. Paul with the amount of communication that he showed you a world in motion by opening up channels that you didn't know existed. My first exposure to places like Truth Out, Common Dreams, the Black Agenda Report, and the World Social Forum all came from all those emails that he sent me. And among others, I suppose. But that has a strange effect on what you learn from him in class. You find out that the struggle's not over. History becomes historical in the Marxist sense of that term, right? It's something that is still open to possibility, that's still subject to change. The change that you read about in a book becomes a change you can fight for. And you come in the next day wanting to learn because you see knowledge no longer as some burden, it's just something for you to regurgitate on test day, but you see your knowledge as a sword and a shield. But the limit to that, I guess, is that swords and shields mean little if we don't know how to use them, but of course Rod would go further and help us learn how to use them. And that makes me think of Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, right? And so the pedagogy of the oppressed is about blurring the line between student and teacher, right? And allowing the student to assume that other role, to become the power, assume the location of relative power in the classroom, right? But what does that mean in practice? Well, I'll talk about how Rod did it, right? Lessons would begin by engaging our experiences. Anyone who's in Rod's classes knows that he would start by asking a question, and students would answer the question. He'd write down the answer, all the students' answers, responses on the board, kind of like saving them up so that way we could throw them back into the lesson, because then what you said was important. Imagine that. A classroom where what you said was important, right? It was an act of faith and confidence in us, but he would often let one student say something and provoke another student's response and let that go back and forth. And as a teacher, I know that that's really difficult because that can really get out of hand. But he kind of just watches it. And the only time that he'll intervene is if you made a statement that wasn't considerate of others or that was just completely uninformed. If he would bring in some information that would kind of help focus your points. But he would let you develop your ideas, but more important than that, right? He would let you develop your voice. I remember taking a public speaking class, which was mostly about, like this, getting used to this podium atmosphere. God, I was scared. So I learned the mechanics of speaking in that public speaking class, which was not Rod's class. But there was a difference between learning the art of speaking and finding your voice, finding that what you had to say was important. And you could only do that in a class where somebody was willing to let you talk and let what you had to say, what you thought, your perceptions of the world around you, would regard that as important, right? And you can only learn to cultivate your voice because if you felt like the person there, the professor, the presider cared about what you said, and that was Rod.